2,000 feet, 2,000 feet, into the ag, 47 degrees.
Roger.
4 forward, drift into the right a little.
30 seconds.
Forward, drift.
"100 years, 4 kings and 1 queen. The last century has witnessed numerous innovations and developments that have expanded our horizons and minds. A century ago, the world looked very different to how it looks now. Following decades of unprecedented social, political, technological, and economic upheaval, the world is evolving at an alarming rate, and the monarchy must grow with it to stay relevant in this ever-changing world.
Think what we would have missed if we had never heard the Beatles, used a mobile phone, or surfed the net.
The First World War had ended in victory for the Allied forces, and peace and prosperity had returned. Economies flourished after the destruction wrought by the war, and the country hurtled a second decade into the 20th century.
George V was a very good king in the sense that everything that was integral to his being was about responsibility and duty and dignity, and he took his role very seriously.
He was a king who had to move with the times. He did so by presenting himself as a figure of duty, who took his responsibilities as king very seriously, who put the nation ahead of his own desires.
King George V made the first ever radio broadcast by a monarch on 23 April 1924, formally opening to the world the British Empire Exhibition, a venture designed to promote the benefits of the empire to the broader British public.
Come here today with the Queen for the purpose of opening the British Empire Exhibition. Our heartiest congratulations.
As well as being the first live radio broadcast made by a British monarch, it is also the earliest surviving recording of any radio broadcast. Countless families were inspired to buy a wireless set to listen to the radio from the comfort of their own homes.
So at the start of the 20th century, it remains a largely industrial society. Most people work in towns and cities. There's a large working class. They are increasingly frustrated because Britain falls into a depression as a result of the Wall Street crash, which emanates from New York. This plunges many ordinary people into dire poverty. Again, they turn to the extremes. They look to communism, fascism for answers. This is a moment of grave peril for the British monarchy.
The economic boom of the 1920s led to a substantial financial crash in 1929, and the new decade brought new troubles. The monarchy was on the treacherous ground in the early 1930s. Over the last few decades, European royal families were being deposed and exiled, like King George II of Greece, and, in extreme cases, murdered, such as George V's cousin, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, who was killed along with his family by the Bolshevik revolutionists. The 1930s were an exciting time to be alive. The world has seen innovations in transport and technology across the globe. Dams and bridges were built, and economies recovered from several crises. Jazz clubs, Olympic Games, airships, Clark Gable and Greta Garbo on the big screen, the invention of radar, and canned beer. In the New Year celebrations of 1936, the beloved King George V died at Sandringham, and his eldest son Edward acceded to the throne.
It has been an ancient tradition of the British monarchy
that the new sovereign should send a message to his people. Science has made it possible for me to make that written message more personal and to speak to you all over the radio.
Edward VIII was the fast-living prince. He was excited by change and innovation. As a man, he engaged in lots of outdoor pursuits, things like flying, golf, skiing, swimming. He was a real sort of showman in that respect, but he was loved by the public.
In many ways, he was very spoilt, he was very indulged. He was the opposite of his father, who, you know, had duty inbred in every pore, whereas with Edward, duty was drilled into him, which he really resented. So he wanted to be more spontaneous. He definitely was more modern. He went against the grain of his upbringing, the establishment, his background.
Though the young and fashionable king was much beloved by the public, the palace and parliament agreed that he was not well suited to the job. The king had been having an affair with the twice-divorced American socialite Wallis Simpson. In the year he became king, Edward VIII proposed to marry Wallis, an event which triggered a constitutional crisis across the British Empire. Eventually, the king was forced to abdicate to marry the woman he loved, and his younger brother, Prince Albert, became King George VI, the final of 3 kings to reign in 1936.
1936 was the year of 3 kings. It was a year that greatly unsettled the British monarchy. Given how popular Edward had been, after he left, there was a great sense of disappointment. And actually, George VI, the new king, he was really overshadowed by his brother, now titled the Duke of Windsor, through the early years of his reign. He had to do much to win back the loyalty and affection of the greater British public. This was a great moment of crisis for the nation, for the monarchy. In fact, later on, politicians and commentators would describe that the abdication crisis was even more significant for Britain than the Munich crisis of 1938.
On the morning of 3rd September 1939, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain addressed the nation by radio broadcast. With the failure of the German government to withdraw their troops from Poland, the UK was now at war with Nazi Germany. Only 3 years into his sudden ascent to the throne, George, who was still seeking to gain the favor of his people, would now face a Second World War, this time as king.
The day that war was declared against Germany was a great moment of sadness and concern for the British public. They understood why this point had been reached, that Hitler had time and again broken promises, and as a result, Chamberlain and Chamberlain's government had been forced to declare war on Germany. In this moment of crisis, the British public, I think, were looking for leadership not just from the government, but also from the British royal family. They were looking for reassurance that everything would be okay and that the nation would get through this moment of peril.
In the 1940s, war swept through Europe. Nazi Germany's planes ravaged the skies over England. Bombs continued to fall on London, and even Buckingham Palace was not spared.
Of course, when World War II broke out and London was bombed and the royal family did not leave Buckingham Palace, and everyone saw that the palace had been bombed and they went to visit the East End, that was incredibly clever and also incredibly soothing for the British public. So it stopped that them and us divide. Suddenly, it's not them and us, it's they are one of us.
Princess Elizabeth made her first public speech during the Second World War when she was only 14. The purpose of the address was to reassure the children who had to be evacuated during the war. This service, broadcast over the BBC, had only been introduced 4 years before her birth.
My sister is by my side, and we are both going to say good night to you. Come on, Margaret. Good night, children. Good night, and good luck to you all.
In addition to broadcasting, Princess Elizabeth's interest in technology was helping people in another way. At her desperate request, she persuaded her father to allow her to enter the Women's Auxiliary Territorial Service, where she became a driver and car mechanic. Elizabeth also became the first member of the royal family to serve in the military. World War II ended in 1945, and people celebrated their VE Day.
It was 1947, just at the end of the war. And London was ravaged, you know, they'd come back from the army and they had no jobs. It was a really, really dark time. The wedding of Philip and Elizabeth was a light in the darkness, I think Churchill described it as. And the wedding of this sort of very handsome young couple did actually cheer the nation up. It really did, and it was in Westminster Abbey. It had everything that you would expect a beautiful wedding to have.
As rationing was still in place after the war, their 9-foot wedding cake was sourced from donors in Australia, hence the name 10,000 Mile Cake. All the ingredients, including 60 pounds of butter, 55 pounds of sugar, 75 pounds of flour, 660 eggs, 80 oranges and lemons, 300 pounds of fruit, and 3.5 gallons of Navy rum were all mixed by machinery. The popularity of the monarchy grew thanks to George VI's stable rule during the war, but at the same time, his health was deteriorating. The whole country prayed for the king's health and quick recovery, but medical technology was insufficient to save him at the time.
George VI, who had, as a young man, often suffered from ill health, became quite ill as a result of the Second World War. The stress of the conflict told on him. He was a heavy smoker, and by 1945, his health was actually very poor. In the ensuing years, that health would deteriorate. A number of smoking-related diseases would afflict the king, to the extent where he would ultimately die prematurely in 1952.
King George VI died in 1952 at 56, and his daughter, Princess Elizabeth, became Elizabeth II.
Our late sovereign lord, King George VI of blessed memory, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown is solely and rightfully come to the high and mighty Princess Elizabeth Alexandra Mary.
Her reign was very modern from the start, her birth roughly coinciding with the development of television. At her coronation, she broke with tradition by allowing the BBC to broadcast her event live.
The coronation was a huge and very significant affair. It was a 3-hour ceremony. It was, everybody recalls, the coldest June day that had ever happened, and it was pouring with rain. This is 1953, so the army was enormous, and they had every sort of foot or 2 feet along the pavement, there was what they call streetliners, which were soldiers, and they were all really cold, and they were given sugar lumps infused with brandy to sort of keep them going. And the ceremony itself was very, very serious and very religious and very dramatic.
Over 20 million people watched the coronation on TV, exceeding the 11 million radio listeners for the first time. And this became the most important event in making television mainstream media. Now, people can see the Queen's Christmas message for the first time.
Happy Christmas. 25 years ago, my grandfather broadcast the first of these Christmas messages. Today is another landmark, because television has made it possible for many of you to see me in your homes on Christmas Day.
An unnoticed death occurred the very next year of the coronation. At 43 Adlington Road, Wilmslow, on 8th June, the deceased was the famous Alan Turing. As much of Turing's work was protected by official secrecy laws, he was never fully recognized in Britain during his lifetime. Educated at Princeton and Cambridge, he was recruited by the British government in 1939 to lead a group of cryptographers known as Ultra. They all worked top secret at Bletchley Park in Buckinghamshire, England, deciphering highly encrypted war messages from the German Enigma machine. The deciphering machine in everyday use at the time was a pre-war design by Polish mathematicians called the bomb. The Nazis had already adapted the bomb by increasing the rotor of the cipher machine and completely changing the program, making deciphering challenging. When Turing joined the team, he redesigned the machine and, after mathematically eliminating the code and going through a series of simplified processes, reduced the time it took to decipher Nazi messages from weeks to minutes. By 1943, the revolutionary machine was deciphering a staggering 84,000 messages a month, which meant that the Ultra team could crack around 2 messages a minute. He faced nearly impossible odds of 1 in 158 quintillions, 962 quadrillions, 555 trillion, 217 billion, 826 million, and 360,000. For success in intercepting and deciphering an extremely complicated encrypted code while the clock is ticking. Alan Turing directly changed history, bringing the war to an end 2 years earlier and saving the lives of at least 14 million people. After World War II, Turing created the first modern-style computer, which, as well as being digital, could be programmed for many things. He even believed that computers could think for themselves, to the point where we couldn't even tell if the subject we were talking to was a human or a machine. And this thinking led to the famous Turing test, which still no program has ever passed. Alan Turing's research in artificial intelligence continued to advance. In 1952, at the height of his scientific career, he was arrested and convicted of aggravated indecent assault for his homosexual relationship. Turing was even denied access to the facilities at Bletchley Park, the network of British cryptographic centers where he worked during the Second World War. He did not choose to go to prison to continue his scientific research. He was eventually required to have regular estrogen injections to reverse his natural urges, a treatment also known as chemical castration. 2 years after his chemical castration, he was found dead in his home from cyanide poisoning. And although his death remains a mystery, the official story is that he died by suicide. Man's ambition was no longer satisfied with the clear blue sky, but began to aspire to the infinite darkness, the universe. In 1954, a foundry worker in the industrial school in Saratov found his real calling at the Saratov Flying Club and in the lectures of the scientist Konstantin Tchaikovsky 3 years after he joined the school. Later he wrote, "Tchaikovsky turned my whole soul upside down. I have a new disease, a thirst for the sky, a thirst for space." By 1959, when a special commission began selecting the first 20 cosmonaut candidates, he was all prepared. While scientists and doctors were researching his physical and mental qualities, the government examined his relationships and even how he looked in photographs. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev was particularly fond of the portrait of this young man, believing that the country needed an impeccable hero like this and a living symbol of socialism. Yuri Gagarin became the first person to go into space, became the hero. The space program was carried out in complete secrecy when the Soviet Union and the United States were competing, and the space race was one way to achieve victory. The Soviets were the first to send a cosmonaut into space, and on 12 April 1961, all Soviet radios broadcast the happy news of success as Gagarin bravely conquered space for 108 minutes. The world reacted with great enthusiasm to the information, and Yuri Gagarin's act dominated the headlines in the West, including Britain. At the invitation of the National Union of Foundry Workers, he was scheduled to make a private visit to the UK from 11th to 15th July. The government had been conservative towards the hero from the Soviet Union because of Britain's support for capitalism and its siding with the United States during the Cold War. Prime Minister Harold Macmillan personally signed the decree recommending that no receptions be held for Yuri Gagarin. Only the Deputy Minister for Aviation was sent to meet him at the airport. The journalists on the scene were tasked with identifying and highlighting Gagarin's shortcomings, but everything changed when the Soviet pilot came from the plane with a smile. Kamanin, who accompanied Gagarin on that tour, later wrote, "Everywhere Gagarin passed, there were enthusiastic people, even people who would wait hours in the rain under umbrellas for the Soviet cosmonaut to appear. Such a warm and gracious attitude from Londoners completely changed our perception of British restraint and calm." The silver Rolls-Royce in which Gagarin traveled had a license plate reading YG1. During his visit to London, he also received a book about the city's attractions, which reads, "Admiration from the citizens of London." Meanwhile, the Soviet trade fair at Earl's Court sold out of color postcards with Gagarin's head on them. The response from the British public was far more enthusiastic than the government had expected, and the British government had to change all its plans immediately. On 13th July, Macmillan invited Yuri to his temporary home. At the meeting, Gagarin handed Macmillan his book, Road to the Stars. The Prime Minister presented Yuri with a silver tray and told reporters that Gagarin was a delightful and remarkable person. Subsequently, British government officials did not hesitate to express their appreciation of Gagarin publicly and even asked for his autograph. Yet higher honors were still to come when, on 14th July, Elizabeth II personally invited Gagarin to lunch at Buckingham Palace. The delegation was invited to a small living room where they were introduced to Elizabeth II. Kamanin, a member of the entourage, described how an amiable middle-aged woman, very plainly dressed, wearing no jewelry and no trace of makeup, entered the room, and she was the Queen of England. They were invited to lunch in the white drawing room, where Gagarin sat next to the Queen. Gagarin struggled to find his way around the vast array of cutlery laid out on the royal dining table. The Queen told him, "My dear Mr. Gagarin, I was brought up in this place, but believe me, I still don't know in which order I should use all these forks and knives." Royal protocol guides against touching members of the royal family unnecessarily, but at lunch, Gagarin dipped his hand to stroke her leg just above the knee. With an admirable sang-froid, she kept a smile on her face as she sipped her coffee. Gagarin later explained that he'd touched her leg to ensure she was real and not just an animated doll. This reception is now associated with numerous myths and legends. There are rumors that, after the visit of Yuri Gagarin, it became customary in the palace to drink tea in a Russian way, which meant eating a slice of lemon from the cup. Such behavior was previously considered to be indecency by the English aristocrats. The reason for this was Gagarin's directness, as he, while drinking tea with the Queen, followed the Russian habit and ate a slice of lemon. Refined table manners were a disturbing thing for Yuri. Rashashansky, a historian, in his biography of Gagarin, describes another interesting situation that occurred at the table. At the beginning of the lunch, Yuri, seeing a variety of cutlery and realizing that exquisite manners were expected of him, announced, "Let's eat like Russians," took the largest spoon and served himself a salad. The Queen supported him with the words, "Gentlemen, let's eat like Gagarin," and followed his example. Apart from the universe, there is another thing that people are equally fascinated by: the lives of British royalty. At the urging of Lord Mountbatten and his son-in-law, the television producer Lord Brabourne, the Queen gave the BBC permission to make a documentary, The Royal Family, in 1969. The documentary was a great insight into the daily lives of the royal family. Because of the rapid development of technology after the Second World War, Europe went through a phase of modernization, with the royal family becoming increasingly irrelevant to ordinary people. This documentary also aims to make their image sweeter and more modern. Palace press officer William Heseltine was also keen on the idea, and eventually Prince Philip was also brought on board. However, the Queen was initially doubtful about the idea, and her daughter, Princess Anne, did not like the idea of exposing her life more to the public eye. But with many persuasions, in 1968, a BBC documentary unit began filming the family at Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, and even on the royal yacht and train. Richard Costin led the team and shot 43 hours of unscripted material overall. The documentary contained many beautiful moments, like the breakfast table scene, where the royal family sat dining together. The family conveyed the image aimed to be portrayed, that the royals were just like any other family, except that they possessed the values and mannerisms that the British monarchy stands for. The attempt to humanize the Queen particularly stands out in one cute little scene, where the Queen buys treats from a candy store for her youngest son, Edward.
Have you got any balls on? How much is it? Put your trouble in it, please.
The documentary deliberately attempted to depict the Queen's domestic duties alongside her political ones, making her relatable to ordinary working women. Ironically, the breaking news at the filming time and the documentary's subsequent release also reveal some of the family's darker side. A particular incident is when one day, during the shooting, Prince Philip snapped at the filming crew saying, "Get away from the Queen with your bloody cameras." Moreover, in the documentary, Queen Elizabeth reportedly compared the then U.S. ambassador to a gorilla.
He said to me, there's a gorilla coming in. So I said, what an extraordinary remark to make, very unkind about anybody. And so, I stood in the middle of the room and pressed the bell and the doors opened, and there was a gorilla. And I had the most terrible trouble in keeping, he had short body, long arms. And
Perhaps due to such controversies, Buckingham Palace retraced its initial decision and requested the BBC to archive the documentary soon after its premiere. It was shown only once in public, in 1977. The palace later permitted a few clips to be broadcast, but stood firm in its decision to limit the circulation of royal family. It is important to note that on 21st June 1969, when the royal family was premiered across England, 30 million viewers watched it in Britain alone, causing a water shortage in London when everyone went to the toilet to flush at the same time during the interval. Hence, the documentary earned a mysterious and legendary status. When it was recently leaked on YouTube, it created quite a spectacle.
What's this for? What's this for?
Well, it's for helping to turn things over here.
Humanity's exploration never stops, and an even more extraordinary achievement was born on 20th July 1969.
Okay, all flight controllers, go for landing. Retro. Go. Fido. Go. Guidance. Go. Control. Go. Telcom. Go. GNC. Go. Ecom. Go. Surgeon. Go. Capcom, we're go for landing. Altitude 4,200. Houston, you're go for landing, over. Roger, understand. Go for landing. 3,000 feet. You're looking great. How you doing, Control? We look good here, fine. Roger, how about you, Telcom? Go. Guidance, you happy? Go. Fido. Go. 2,000 feet. 2,000 feet. Into the ag, 47 degrees. Roger. 47 degrees. Still looking very good. Your go. Top alarm. 1201. 1201. Roger, 1201 alarm. 1201 alarm. Same type, we're go, flight. Okay, we're go. We're go, same type, we're go. Altitude 1,600. Eagle looking great. Roger, 1202, we copy it. 35 degrees, 750, coming down to 23. 540 feet and at 15. 350 feet down at 4. Altitude, velocity light. 3.5 down, 220 feet. 11 forward, coming down nicely, 200 feet. 4.5 down, 5.5 down. 100 feet, 3.5 down, 9 forward. 75 feet, that's looking good, down a half. 6 forward. 60 seconds. Lights on. Forward. Forward. 40 feet down, 2.5. Picking up some dust. Straight shadow. 4 forward, drift into the right a little. 30 seconds. Forward, drift. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. We copy you down, Eagle. Listen, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Just a few months after the moon landing, astronauts Michael Collins, Neil Armstrong, and Buzz Aldrin traveled to Buckingham Palace as part of their world tour and met with not only the Queen, but also a young Prince Edward, Princess Anne, and Prince Philip. The meeting that day did not go as well as the moon landing. Michael Collins almost fell down the stairs trying not to turn his back on Queen Elizabeth II. And Neil Armstrong had a bad cold that day, but his wife insisted on going. Paul Haney, the NASA announcer, wrote in his book, That Silent Sea, Mr. Armstrong coughed in the monarch's face just as he was about to leave. He wrote, "She knew he had a cold. He tried to say something like, 'Thanks, we had a great time.' Instead, he coughed in her face. Mortified, he again tried to mouth an apology and hit her in the face with another cough. She held up both hands in surrender." The meeting was not Elizabeth II's only connection to the first lunar landing. Her words and the messages from other world leaders were etched onto a small silicon disc deposited at Tranquility Base. On behalf of the British people, I salute the skills and courage which have brought man to the moon. May this endeavor increase the knowledge and well-being of mankind. During World War II, English codebreakers were using early computers to help win the war, and personal computers didn't enter homes or workplaces until the 70s. Then came the Internet. In March 1976, the Queen visited a telecommunications research center in Malvern, England. She used ARPANET, a military computer network linking universities, government agencies, and defense contractors, to send an email long before it was used like it is today. There was an early type of Internet, but it didn't run in the way that most people think of the Internet now, says Monash University Associate Professor Alan Turing, who specializes in the history of technology. The late Peter Kirstein, dubbed the European father of the Internet, set up the Queen's first official email account and guided her through sending her first message. Her username was also quite interesting, HME2.
The Internet, the World Wide Web, and the browser have revolutionized the way we work, the way we consume, the way we communicate, and the way we live. Indeed, Her Majesty was at the vanguard of this revolution when she sent an email in 1976. Her Majesty's first email used primitive networking technology, which gradually evolved into the Internet as we know it today, thanks to the work of the prize winners and other engineers around the world. Let me now introduce 4 of our prize winners and ask them to come forward to receive their award. Dr. Vinton Cerf for the Internet.
The World Wide Web was invented in 1989 by British scientist Tim Berners-Lee during his work at CERN. The web was initially conceived and developed to meet the need for automated information sharing between scientists in universities and research institutes worldwide. By the 90s, the World Wide Web began to go global. Its immense usefulness is undeniable and still profoundly affects our lives today. Queen Elizabeth II knighted Tim Berners-Lee in the 2004 New Year Honors for services to the global development of the Internet. In 1997, the first royal website was launched.
Chris, what do you think about the royal website?
I think it's quite informative. There's a lot of information on here that you wouldn't otherwise be able to find out through textbooks and other media sources. There's not a great deal of animations like you would expect on most internet sites, but I'm sure it'll be improved as people send responses to the site.
The 1997 Christmas message was published on the Internet for the first time that year. In her 1999 Christmas message, after the birth of the World Wide Web, she remarked on the future and welcomed technology developments. As I look to the end, I have no doubt at all that the one certainty is change, and the pace of that change will only seem to increase.
Think what we would have missed if we had never heard the Beatles, used a mobile phone, or surfed the net. Or, to be honest, listened to other people talking about surfing the net.
With the development of communication media, the flow and the volume of information has grown almost explosively. The British press never let the royal family off the hook, which was highly evident in the 90s.
Divorce? Very much. Never been mentioned by anybody.
Gossip and scandals surrounding the younger royals turned into divorces for Prince Andrew, Princess Anne, and most damagingly of all, Prince Charles. The Queen referred to 1992, the height of the scandals, as her Annus horribilis.
1992 is not a year on which I shall look back with undiluted pleasure. In the words of one of my more sympathetic correspondents, it has turned out to be an annus horribilis.
And the destruction caused by a fire at Windsor Castle. After much debate on the suggestion that the taxpayer pay for the damage, in 1993, Buckingham Palace opened its doors to the paying public for the first time to recoup some of the cost of rebuilding Windsor Castle. For the first time in history, the Queen and the royal family also began to pay taxes. With the revelation of Princess Diana's failed marriage, public sympathy for her has given the royal family a bad reputation, and the public's perception of the royal family reached a low point with the death of Princess Diana in 1997. At that time, the Queen did not take care of the public mood and stayed in Balmoral according to precedent. The public was not happy with this, and even saw this behavior as a sign of cruelty and indifference. The people called on the Queen to break protocol and lower flags at half-mast at Buckingham Palace. The popularity of the monarch has never been so low since the abdication crisis of Edward VIII. As a result of the remarkable change in public behavior, the Queen had to react immediately, starting with her televised address to the nation and bowing to Diana's funeral procession in a cleverly conceived and carefully choreographed television service. The massive success of the Golden Jubilee celebrations in 2002 demonstrated the rapid public support for her success. The extraordinary sight of Brian May playing solo guitar on the roof of Buckingham Palace was unforgettable.
Incredible. It's kind of dreamlike, really. Yeah, I've been thinking about it for a long time. Obviously, it's been in the cards for a while. Yeah, I'm thrilled and not a little terrified.
With the successive releases of Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, people's lives have been turned upside down once again. In 2007, a dedicated royal website was created where her speeches, Christmas broadcasts, and more could be viewed. Moreover, the Queen embraced social media to share any significant events, royal duties, or messages. In 2014, she sent her very first tweet. And in 2019, her first Instagram post, sharing a detailed letter between her great-great-grandfather and computing pioneer Charles Babbage.
Ah, yes, as well. Perfect. It'll come up in a minute, but I can see it there. There we are. A letter from Prince Albert.
In August 2009, British programmer John Graham Cumming started a petition urging the British government to apologize for Turing's prosecution as a homosexual. The petition received more than 37,000 signatures. The Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, acknowledged the petition, releasing a statement on 10 September 2009 apologizing and describing the treatment of Turing as appalling. On 24 September 2013, Queen Elizabeth II signed a pardon for Turing's conviction for gross indecency with immediate effect. Announcing the pardon, Lord Chancellor Chris Grayling said Turing deserved to be remembered and recognized for his fantastic contribution to the war effort, and not for his later criminal conviction. The Queen's action is only the fourth royal pardon granted since the conclusion of the Second World War.
We're enormously proud, my children and all my grandchildren are just enormously proud, and both my sisters, of course. You know, he just achieved so much towards winning the war, and it's great that this recognition has come to him now, and that this public apology has been made. It's wonderful.
I'm absolutely delighted. It's like a great Christmas present, I think. Alan Turing's work was so fundamental in the work at Bletchley Park in helping us to win the Second World War, shortening the war by approximately 2 years and saving millions of lives. It's been said that 11 million people a year were dying during the Second World War, so the work that was done there shortened the war by 2 years, so that's 22 million lives that were saved. So Alan Turing getting this recognition with a royal pardon today is wonderful.
In the same year, the Queen amended the Bill of Rights and the Act of Settlement in the Succession to the Crown Act, 2013. The changes saw the end of the system of male primogeniture. Female heirs will no longer lose their place in the line of succession because of their gender. Royal marriages, too, were moving in a more modern direction. The Queen's eldest son, Prince Charles, now King Charles III, remarried in 2005. In a small civil ceremony, Charles and Camilla married at Windsor Guildhall. Buckingham Palace announced that the Queen would not attend the ceremony, but would attend the church blessing and host a reception. In 2018, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle got married. In some ways, their marriage demonstrated the progress and modernization of the monarchy. Meghan, a biracial American divorcee, would not have been welcomed in the past. The Queen's uncle, King Edward VIII, had to abdicate the throne to marry his American divorcee. However, during Elizabeth's reign, much changed, and Meghan was warmly welcomed into the family. The uniquely tricky start to the 2020s saw a global pandemic sweep worldwide. In the following months, coronavirus started to make its way across the globe. Few thought the coronavirus would cause the world to stop for so long. It has caused a global economic recession and a supply chain crisis. But closer to home, it caused people to stop their lives, lock their doors, and stay away from the people they love for fear of transmitting a virus that may prove fatal. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the Queen quickly adjusted to using video chats through Zoom to conduct her royal duties and engagements.
Not being allowed to see your relatives was very hard, wasn't it?
It was against everything that we know of care for patients. We know that families are really important, and we were also separated from our family. So yes, it was very difficult.
It obviously was a very frightening experience to have COVID very badly, wasn't it?
Those patients in those beds, they were somebody's loved ones, away from home, away from their families, fighting a dreadful virus. As nurses, we made sure that they were not alone. We held their hands, we wiped their tears, and we provided comfort.
While taking part in a virtual science showcase via a video call, the Queen had a team of scientists in stitches when one of them asked what Yuri Gagarin, the first human in space, was like when she met him. Russian, the monarch deadpanned before bursting into giggles.
Yuri Gagarin, the first human to travel out into space, was also born on the 9th of March. And I believe, ma'am, that you met him. Can you tell us about that?
I did indeed, yes. It was very interesting to meet him.
What was he like?
Russian. He didn't speak English.
He didn't speak English?
No, he was fascinating. And I suppose being the first one, it was particularly fascinating.
The Elizabethan era ended 3 months after the 70th anniversary of the Platinum Jubilee celebrations. Queen Elizabeth II died on 8th September 2022.
The Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III. God save the King!
King Charles III was proclaimed king on 10th September 2022, only 2 days after his mother's death. The accession of King Charles III ushers us into a new era of the monarchy. As Prince of Wales, Charles was outspoken about many issues, including sustainable agriculture and environmentalism. As king, now he will have to step back from lobbying the government. He has spent 70 years preparing for this role. One can only hope it has been enough. In an era of ever-quickening change, political instability, and societal crisis, one hopes that the monarchy will offer a similarly constant presence as the Elizabethan era, which has been a comfort to so many in the past century and become a cornerstone of English national identity. The world today has changed so drastically over the past century that it is almost unrecognizable. But one thing has remained the same, steady and unwavering: the English monarchy.